Welcome to our next video here, our next discussion. For this one, we're going to be talking about web application recon and scanning. So we'll be moving into chapter 3 in our book, and this will be allowing us to continue our progression as we start to learn how to attack or hack websites. We're going to have a couple, or I'm going to do a little bit of review here. Make sure, last week we had a couple of videos, but in those videos, although they were relatively short, there was quite a bit of information packed into those. So I want to review a bit about the VMs, getting those set up, and some other items that you may want to consider when you're setting your VM up as well. So we'll have a little bit of review there, and then we're going to get into the application itself. We'll start setting up and focusing on what that chapter is talking about. That is recon and our ability to understand as much as we can about a site with just some passive and some active techniques there. Okay, so with that, we'll jump right into it. I'd like to start off talking a little bit about some of the high-level issues here that we need to consider as we're going through these tools. And so one of the first things that comes up is, do we need to know how to attack in order to defend? Do we really need to know how to hack in order to be able to protect or defend our websites? And I think the answer to that varies. Personally, I think that it is a good thing and to be able to understand is how our sites hacked, because that in turn makes us write better code. Me personally, I have been a developer for quite a few years now, and there was a lot of attacks that when I first started out, I had no idea people were able to do that. They were able to attack a web application in that way, which made my site vulnerable and the users of my site vulnerable, which is not a good thing. And so I have gotten a lot of value over the years in understanding how people attack websites in order to write better websites. You're going to be dealing with and working with, regardless of what side of or where you fall, whether you're the developer, you're a security consultant, or a penetration tester, or what have you. You're going to have a variety of different experiences, and you're going to work with developers that have no idea about some of these security topics, and it's going to be an opportunity for you as that security professional to inform them and try to help them to understand how these things occur. And so, I think there is a lot of benefit in starting on this adversarial approach from the offensive side, trying to break something. So, with that, we're going to talk about setting up our VM a little bit, right? So I'm going to review that. We talked about that in the last video. So being able to download some virtualization software, you have two options, primary options anyway: VirtualBox, which is the open source version supported by Oracle, and VMware Player. Keep in mind, VMware Player is only going to work on a Windows machine, because on Linux or on a Mac you have to purchase it. So my intent is not to have anybody have to purchase any software. You should be able to find one of those versions for free that will get you up and running. So hopefully you didn't have any issues with that. As you extract that file, right, so you have two different options. One is to install a VM on your own using Kali, in which case you're not going to find instructions in the book there. So go that route. A lot of resources out there on the web to help you do that. If you get stuck in anything, let me know. I will certainly point you in the right direction. If you download the backtrack from our Google Drive for the course, you just need to extract that and open it up. Once you open up that machine, and I'll go to my virtual machines folder, so you just have to bear with me as I navigate a little bit here. We have my backtrack 5. So you'll have something extracted called backtrack 5. And inside of there, if you have file extensions enabled, if you're on Windows and you don't, you might have to go into your control panel and set those up. You'll have a .vmx, and then you can go ahead and open that. That'll launch your VM. If you have VMware Player open, you can go through the File menu, File Open, and point to this directory, and it'll filter out and pick the right file for you so that I can get that open and launched for you and get you up and running. Once you do that, keep in mind that on both machines you can log in with root and tor, and backtrack is going to present you with the console, so you're going to have to log in there and then type in start X. Once you get logged in, that'll get you into a desktop. With Kali, you just boot right into a desktop. Okay. Both machines, they're going to have a lot of the same tools, but they're configured differently. And so if you're working on Kali, you're going to find your experience is going to be a little bit different. Remember, Kali is the one that's supported, and so for the longevity, what you're going to be working with further on in your career, it's probably going to be Kali. So while backtrack might make it a little bit easier to get started here, it's worthwhile having Kali, at least having a copy of Kali set up and trying to do some of the same work inside Kali so that you're getting some exposure to that as well. But that's not a requirement, so I'll leave that up to you and your how much time you have available this summer to work on the course. Once you get that machine set up, your networking is going to be a large component of it. Today we're going to start talking about, or this week we're going to start moving into interacting with websites and using some tools to do that. And so one of the things that we need to be very careful on is that we don't set our tools loose on a target on a website that we don't have permission to do that on. Most of these things are relatively benign, and if you do enough searching or digging on the web, you'll see that people will use these tools for both positive and negative activities. And so we just want to make sure, though, for everything that we're working on, that there is no way, we have no doubt that what we're doing is safe. And so in order to do that, that largely boils down to your network configuration. And so if you open up your virtual machine, and I'm using VMware Fusion, and so things are going to look just a little bit different here compared to what you're going to be seeing. But if you open up a machine, you're going to have the ability to go into somewhere, either in this toolbar menu or from the file menu drop-down, which you'll be able to see a part of it here, your settings. Right? So if I click on settings, or if I click on settings here, you'll have your network adapter. Okay? You can see that this network adapter, there's two things you can do with this. The first one is that you can connect it. So if you want to make absolutely sure that this virtual machine is not sending out any network traffic, that means you cannot request anything to a website from your browser, then you can just simply uncheck that, and that will disable that adapter altogether. It doesn't exist. The other thing you can do is you can also set it to private with my Mac. If you're on a Windows machine, I think it's going to say something more like host only. Right? That sets up a network between your laptop and the virtual machine that you're running, so that that virtual machine can only contact your host machine, your laptop or your desktop, but nothing else. It can't get out to the internet. Right? So those are the two settings that you're going to want to use in order to ensure that when you start interacting with the site, you don't accidentally have a tool, stray off and probe FBI.gov or something that you don't want to have happen. People do get in trouble for that. They run a tool on a site that they don't have permission to do. Somebody that owns that site is paying attention, and we've had the FBI actually come to campus and look at students that they trace an IP address back to here, and they wanted to know what was going on. So please be very careful. The tools and the book will disclaimer that, so I won't beat that stunt to death, but you do need to be careful because it can get you in legal trouble. So just pay attention as we're setting up this environment to make sure that what you're doing is safe, right? So that's it. VMware Player has a lot of great documentation if you want to know more about those other network settings, right? So again, I don't want to hammer down on too much information here, but there are additional things you can look at on how to configure those. Okay, so Recon. We're moving into our first stage, which is primarily Recon. So what are we doing? We're trying to understand as much as we can about the application, and we're going to do that in a variety of methods. There are two primary methods here, passive and active. Passive is just simply what can I learn about the site by browsing the site. I'm just very passive about it. Active would be like spidering. I want to initiate a scan of that site. I want to scan it for all the content I can possibly find. It's like what Google and the other search engine bots do when they index the content of a site. They're very aggressive. They're very active in that they hit a site, they start searching through and following as many links as they can to content, index as much information as they can about that site. We're talking about scanners now, and so our primary tool here is going to be OWASP Zap as well as Burp Suite, and so we'll be able to look at both of those tools, and both of those tools are going to be very similar in how they operate. Zap is going to be the Z-Attack proxy. That's one of the OWASP tools. We talked a little bit about OWASP last week, and so it's one of their tools. It's a great tool. Burp is going to be very similar, and it's another great tool. And in the web application security course here on campus, the 400 level course, you'll use Burp a lot more and get much more intimate with the details of how it works. With that, the idea behind those tools is that we're going to set them up, and they're going to act as proxies. And so what a proxy is it's simply a piece of software that lives in between our client, so our browser, and the server. And so all those requests that we talked about, the HTTP request response cycle, we'll send those through this proxy, through this tool, and that gives us the ability to not only inspect those, which we did the same thing with our developer tools in our browser, we inspect those, we can also modify those. So as we start to probe or try to look for security vulnerabilities in an application, we can intercept those requests, we can modify values, and then we can send those on. We'll also be able to use these tools to help automate our attack, to help spider, to help probe for weaknesses. And so it makes our job as a security person or security researcher a little bit easier. Scanners have limitations. There are things that they just simply cannot do. These tools are not something that you can simply point at a website and hit the play button and expect it to just hack away. It's not how they work. And so they have certain limitations. They can't intelligently interact with the site like you and I can. And so that's where they will oftentimes provide you the ability to intervene and customize it to do or operate in a way that you want. It can sometimes help with weak passwords, although brute forcing a website is very hard. So sending just request after request, trying to guess a password, it's very difficult, it's very noisy, it's very time consuming and slow to do on a web app. And so oftentimes you're not going to be able to do that. So if the application allows people to create weak passwords, it's very hard for you to determine that without just simply, the better option would be to go to their registration form and see what kind of requirements they have. Parameter names. So we'll talk a little bit more about post and get requests and how does an application send? How does a website send when you go to a form and fill it out and submit it to that server? That data is sent in a key value pair, and that key then is how we identify the information, right? So if you have a username and password, the username field will have a key, which is probably going to be username, and the value is going to be password. You'll have a password field, and the key to that and that key value pair will be password, and the value be whatever your password types in. And so when you send that information to the server needs to be able to pull out and understand what information belongs to what, where did it come from, so it can match that up. And so parameter name guessing can be very difficult, and these tools are not necessarily good at that. We'll talk about here stored SQL injection, broken access control. We'll talk more about these as we go, because each one of these topics, we could spend an hour on each one of them at a minimum. If you're interested, go to OWASP. OWASP talks about each one of these. The book will talk a little bit about it. And then when you get to the Web Application Security course, 434, we'll go into pretty good detail of all of these. All right, so different topics, different ways. There are a lot of different ways on how applications, you can find vulnerabilities in applications. Outside of these, so these are kind of the technical ones. These are errors in the implementation of the application itself. There's additional ones that often result in logic errors. That means that there are the application is built and it's relatively sound, but if your logic isn't correct, then you can exploit that as well. Here's an example. It's a site that I was may or may not have been doing a little probing on myself, and we had the ability, this site here in the shopping cart, to have a negative quantity. So if I had a negative quantity, I updated this cart, and you can see that now I got a negative $1,800. So what happens if I go and check out? I don't know. I certainly didn't do it, but the logic failed. The logic of this program to not allow a negative quantity in the cart failed, and this is definitely an issue with this site, because what if I checked out and this generated a credit to my account? That would be very bad for this organization, because it could be very hard for them to recover if that money was transferred out before they detected it. Apologize for that. It's just my wife asking me what I'm up to. I forgot to put this into presentation mode. Okay, taken care of. Right, so don't forget, I know that you'll hear me, I'm a very big proponent of OWASP as an organization. I am involved in OWASP. I have written or helped write some of the documentation, as well as run the local OWASP chapter, although it's been a couple years now. But definitely take time to look at that. The chapter is dead. It has been done for a little while, but if you're interested or know anybody that's interested in starting it up, I would love to be a part of that. I just can't run it full time. We talked about architectures. Okay, so I won't belabor that point anymore. Just keep in mind that applications are written in a variety of different popular content management systems and frameworks. And so oftentimes when you start probing, WordPress is a good example, because WordPress is a very popular content management system. When you start probing web applications, part of your challenge is to figure out what it is. What is the underlying software? Because if it is a WordPress, guess what? WordPress is a lot like the Microsoft Windows, and that millions of people use it. And so you have millions of people looking for security vulnerabilities on your WordPress sites. And if they find one, then if I find one, let's say I know about a WordPress vulnerability, then maybe I can compromise your site. And because millions of people are using WordPress, I may be able to compromise thousands or tens of thousands of sites. And so that becomes very lucrative because so many people use it. So same thing with you. If you're a security researcher, you're looking at a site, you determine that your client is on a WordPress site. Well, are they keeping their site up to date? because just like we have to update Windows, we have to update WordPress. We have to update the plugins that extend the functionality of WordPress. And if you fail to do that, then you're going to run into issues. Drupal is another content management framework becoming very popular, and Drupal had a very significant security vulnerability. I'll add the video where I talk about it's an SQL injection vulnerability, and I add that video to our playlist so that you can see it. It may not all make sense at this level unless you might be a little more advanced, but it's still worth looking at because due to that vulnerability in that application that every Drupal site had, the person could attack the site and completely own the site. They could create administrative accounts, they could interact with the underlying file system, they could do whatever they wanted. And that's the thing that's important to understand, is that these web servers don't live in isolation on a machine. That's software running on a machine, and they're subject to vulnerabilities in the application and vulnerabilities in the web server software themselves. And so when you can, through an application, you can compromise an entire system, an entire network along the way. And so these applications are critical. And because they're open out there on the internet, we want people to be able to find them and access them. They become a very large attack surface. Okay. If you understand things about sites, then you can look at the source code of a site and you can understand quite a bit about it. Right? So just by looking at the structure here, and we'll take a look at the structure of the site here in just a minute, just simply by looking at this, because we see WP-content. Well, I'm familiar with WordPress. I know that WordPress and every WordPress site has a folder that's called WP-content. And so if I look at the source of this website, I can see that it is in fact a WordPress site. That's information that helps arm us with the ability to make a better assessment of what the security is of this application. Now, it might be hard. We might not find any vulnerabilities because maybe this is a well-maintained site, it's patched, and we just can't find anything. But that gives us the ability to determine more. When we talk about network scanning, and penetration testing from the network side, we'll do the same process there. We'll try to identify a host, because then if we can identify what type of host it is, then we can go and look at all of the known vulnerabilities, and maybe we can exploit that there and make our lives a lot easier as far as finding a vulnerability and then being able to report that. How do you get to this view? Well, if you open up a website, and I'll open up, this is just one of my own sites, you can right-click on it and you can view page source, right? So regardless of what browser you're using, it will give you some option. It may look different, but most of them will give you something very similar to this. And if you look at the source then, this is all of that source that we were just looking at, right? So again, you're looking at my site, you know nothing about it, but if you come into the site and you start looking through some of these links, then what you may or may not see is information about, right? So like right here, that's a good example, a WP- includes. And because we saw that WP- content, we know that that is part of a WordPress site. This is another indication that this is a WordPress site. And in fact it is. So now we know something about this application, even though it's not necessarily apparent anywhere on the site itself. Okay, so speaking of WordPress, how do we know that? Well, keep in mind that web applications, all they are on a server is folders and files. And we set those up on a web server in a particular directory, and then when we make requests, the web server is configured to understand what folder to look in and then pull out what files to serve you based off of that request. Okay, so this is a little bit different than what you're going to see on your machine. So if you look at your backtrack machine, well, here, let's just do that. Nope, that's not the one. I have two backtracks. I don't want that one. Like this one. Okay, if you looked at your script that you used to install, what you saw was var www was the folder, so we can navigate there on the command line. CD is the command to do that. That's change directory. Clear will clear the screen, and then ls will list the contents. Okay, so by default, Apache is going to serve content from this file system. Right, this is just a Linux distribution. It's just an operating system, so it's going to serve files from here. And now these are all of the files that you're interacting with for the DVWA application. Right, it's a series of files. They have a .php extension because those are the language that this application was written in, and we'll maybe talk about that later on. Needless to say, this is like the HTML that you're requesting. These files generate the HTML that your browser understands and is requesting. And then these blue parts are folders, right? So this whole thing, and we can look at this in a graphical environment. Oh, somewhere here. Here we go. Computer. And put a file system. Okay. var www. Right, and here it is. Okay, here are the files and the folders, and that's all an application is. Now I do a lot of development work, and so you'll see for me, not only do I have a different location just because I moved it there for backup purposes, but I also have a lot of sites, right? So my web server, this is the document root or the default folder that it looks in, and then each one of these applications I can match up to a domain name. Right, so this is really how shared hosting works if you've ever dealt with hosting a website. Multiple sites on one server, and then we just map domains to it. This could be josh.dsu.edu, this one could be Kelloland, this one could be dsu.edu, this one could be reallycoolwebsite.com. We just map the server, we give it a domain name, and we say this domain name opens up this website or this web application. Inside of there then, this is how we request those contents or those documents. Okay, so this is a WordPress site, and this is how every WordPress site is set up. WP admin, WP content, WP includes. And so when you look at the source of that website, you can see some of these paths as it's looking for other resources, images and style sheets and JavaScript, and that can give you insight into the fact, well, this is a WordPress site. And I know that. It took me 5 seconds to figure that out. I looked at the source, I looked through some content, and there it was. WP content and some image that it's requesting, some image that's displayed on the page. The other thing that's important is if you're able to compromise a machine, what do you want to get out of this? Well, in all WordPress sites and in most applications, because these are going to connect to a database in order to provide the ability of that application to store content. Right? When you create a username and password, we have to store that somewhere, so we're going to put that in a database. We have to be able to configure the application to connect to that. And so in this case, we have, for WordPress sites, wp-config.php. And if we open that up, what you'll see is here's my database username, root, and here's my database password, root. Right? So if you can now pull out the credentials, the information, because you've compromised this site, you know how to connect to that database server. And now you can dump the database. And if that database has usernames, passwords, maybe that has credit card numbers in it or something, that's a big deal. Because if that organization lost their credit card numbers, they would be in a lot of trouble. They would face significant fines. Plus, the confidence from their consumers, their customers would be eroded. And it would take them a long time to recover that. Right? So that's the general structure. Okay, again, it's just to get a basic understanding of what's going on here. Okay, so we'll move into Lab 2. Make sure that you read Chapter 3 before attempting. Okay, so if you've never heard of a proxy, you've never set one up before, you have no idea what I'm talking about, make sure that you read that chapter and get a good understanding. We're gonna go through that here in a minute, and I'll show you how to set one up and how to use those in your lab, in your environment. This is the lab itself then. Okay, so check this. This is going to be in Dropbox as well as the folder within our Google Drive. It's based off of Chapter 3, and the idea behind this is to use a proxy tool. So we have Burp Suite and you have Zap, and both of those should be installed on either Kali or Backtrack. If not, you have the ability to install those as well. So just go to their respective websites and there'll be instructions there on how to download and install those. Be careful, you can get in trouble, so don't point these tools at anything but our DVWA application inside of our VM. Disconnect your VM from the internet. If you're not sure, disconnect the network adapter, whatever you have to do, just make sure that you feel safe. If you're not sure, if you're not confident, send me an email, let me know, and I can help make that assessment or evaluation for you. The deliverable here will be a lot like the last one, and that I'm just looking for you to take some screenshots, put them into a Word doc or a PDF, and then submit them to the Dropbox, right? So this will be a combination of screenshots as well as some short answers. I tried to highlight with each step what I'm looking for. So for this particular one, no screenshot or no answer required. So what you're doing then is you're simply exploring DVWA. Right? So again, our target application here is DVWA. You don't need to use the proxy or anything. You're just simply exploring the site and simply trying to find as many files and folders and resources as you can. A part of discovery in the application is finding things, folders, and paths and resources. Because if you found WP admin you could probably make a pretty safe assumption that if you could get access to this, then you'd have administrative access to the site, and that would be, from your perspective as the attacker, that would be good. Okay, the next one, configure your browser to use Burp Suite, and then use the spidering feature to spider just DVWA, right? And then provide a screenshot of your results. So it would look similar to this, and we'll go through that here in just a second. Okay, the next one, screenshot and a short answer. So close Burp and start Zap. Recon DVWA by first spidering the site. Then do an active scan. Right? Provide me with the screenshot and talk to me or tell me about what did you see in the difference. Right? Can you explain that? What is the difference between spidering and running an active scan? Okay, we talked about logging in. Right? So you may have initiated each one of these scans versus the spidering as well as the active before you logged in. And if you didn't log in, make sure you log in, because that'll change that tool's ability to interact with the site. If you did not log in, you don't have an active authenticated session with that application. And so you need to log in and then tell your spider your proxy in order to do the work for you, right? Because it doesn't have that session. When you, and you'll see here in a minute, as we start interacting with our proxies, we're initiating the requests and the response through our browser. And so the proxy is just simply acting as a pass-through. And so if we make a request and we don't have an authenticated session, right? We don't have that session identifier that tells the server that we've authenticated, then when you tell it to start to spider or to do an active scan, it doesn't have a way to authenticate itself because you never did that. And so it's going to run into limitations that it's probably not going to be able to go past or beyond that login screen. If you log in and then you run that tool, you now have, at least temporarily, you have an active session. So you have that cookie that's been set. Your proxy knows about that. So now as you tell it to interact with the site, it'll send that cookie with each one. The server will then get that session identifier, that cookie value, and know that you've authenticated. So it'll be able to access anything that you would have as an authenticated user, right? So just like when you navigate the site, you can't do much, or you're limited in functionality before you log in. So logging in will give you greater access to it. And that's particularly the case with DVWA. So don't forget that your proxies, Zap and Burp, are going to be under those same limitations. Okay, so that'll be the fourth part there. And then just think about, so we've been using these for an adversarial manner. So how could you use these for defense? Right? How could you use this in order to enhance the security of your applications, your web applications for your company or your organization? Okay. Short answers, a couple sentences, a paragraph or so, and we'll be good there. So that's our lab. Again, open up in the Dropbox as well as the resource section. So I'll go back to my backtrack machine. And a couple things we have to do. So again, this assumes that you have DVWA installed and up and running. Make sure that, especially if you shut down or restart your machine each time, that you have Apache and MySQL running after you've set up DVWA. Okay, so sudo service apache 2 start, and it should say that it's already started. In this case, you see it's already running. And sudo service MySQL start. And if it's already running, it's going to tell you it's already running. So make sure that those are both up and running. From there, go to a browser, type in localhost, and you should be presented with either this screen here, because you've already logged in, or the login screen. Okay, admin password is how you get in to the site. Okay, and since we've logged in, we've authenticated, we've got a token, a cookie that has our authenticated session, we can explore all of this site. Okay, the tools then, where you're going to find our tools in Backtrack will be, there's this Backtrack menu item, so underneath Applications, Backtrack. It always takes me a second, I always forget because to me they're just in a non-intuitive spot, so you might have to bear with me here as I look through these. Here we go, I think I found it right away. All right, so there we have Backtrack, Vulnerability Assessment, Web Application Assessment, Web Application Proxies, Burp Suite, and OWASP. They're both in the same location. Right? On Kali, it's going to be a little bit different, and so just keep in mind that if you can't find it, then probably the easiest thing to do is just do a quick search on Google, because I'm sure you're not the first person that's had that problem, and you'll be able to find it pretty quickly. It's not the same location, though. You're not going to be able to find all these things in the same location. So just one of the small challenges with getting familiar with Kali. Again, it's worth the effort because you're probably going to use Kali more in the future here than you are Backtrack, but this is just to help us be able to keep up with the book. Okay, so in this case, I'm just going to use burp, and I'll leave the OWASP portion of the lab up to you to explore. Okay, so if you run into any issues there, as with anything else, let me know and I'll help you out. But if we open up burp, okay, you may get some information there or some complaints. That's fine. You can ignore that, that message. Here is your tool. Okay, so you can see Burp Suite is open, and what we have here is the way that this tool works, and Zap is going to be relatively similar, is we have a series of menu items, tabs, and then subtabs. And these tabs are what's going to provide us with the primary functionality with the Burp Suite tool. As we change tabs, the subtabs are going to change. Right? So if we have target, we have sitemap and scope. And for the purposes of spidering, those are the ones that we're going to focus on. We'll talk about some of these other ones here later on as we move down the road. If we go back to the site and we initiate a request to the application, or let's just say that we go to a different page altogether, we go back to Burp, we'll see that there is nothing being located here. Right? This is our sitemap. This is going to tell us about the information of the sites that we're going to. So what we have to do is we have to tell our browser to use a proxy. So this is Firefox on Backtrack. You need to go into your preferences, and this will be the same pretty much across all versions or platforms that run Firefox. Advanced tab here on the top, and then your network settings. Once you're on that tab, go to this connection. How does Firefox connect to the internet? And we click settings from there. And what we're telling it to do is that we want to connect through a proxy. Okay? Our proxy is going to be running on 127.0.0.1. That means localhost. And we're going to have it set up to listen on port 8080. Okay? Ports have to be unique because we have a web server running on this machine right now and it's listening on port 80. We have to have it listen on something other than port 80. And so it's just very common for these proxies to set themselves up on 8080. Okay? So we change that. You can click this button here for use this proxy for all protocols and then click OK. And now you should be set. Okay? What happens? Well, let's refresh our page and see. And now we're starting to get just a spinning wheel. So we may have a problem here in that we're waiting, and this is taking a long time. So the problem is right now that the browser is waiting on the proxy. We've added an intermediary between us and our web server, and so we're waiting on the proxy. The proxy, though, has intercepted the request, and because it's intercepted that request, you can see that one, the browser is waiting and waiting patiently, and two, Burp Suite has this tab highlighted. Okay, here is the request. So we've intercepted that request. So this is the raw headers. There's the GET, there's the page, there's the HTTP, there's the host, and all this additional information to include the session ID. Okay, so right now we're not too concerned about intercepting. So what happens though is by default, intercept is on, and so we just want to come to this tab and we want to click intercept off. And that'll get us back to a point where our page is now, our browser is now working fine. Okay. What we get now in our Burp tool is it's passively scanning, or it's passively looking at all the requests as they go from our browser to whatever server that we're going to. Okay. You'll get, as you look through this, you'll see that there's a difference in the colors, right? This one's bold and these ones are kind of grayed out. Bold is a site that we've actually gone to. These ones that are grayed out are just URLs that it's picked up on that document, but it's not actually gone there. Okay, so you may see this. You're not scanning Silly Chicken or W3.org or Security Focus. The only ones that have been gone to are the ones that are, actually bold. So let's go. I don't know if I have this connected to the internet, but dsu.edu. Yeah, okay, so I did. And so now if I go back to Burp, we'll see that dsu.edu is black. The rest of these are kind of grayed out. Okay, so this can get full pretty quick. You're going to be in an environment where you're probably not going to any other website, so you should be able to keep that clutter at a minimum, but just so you know what's going on there. Okay, now that we have the sitemap, then we have to go to the Scope tab. And all we're doing here is that we're making sure that we're including just localhost and 127.0.0.1 in the scope. Right, so we're about ready to spider this site, and we don't want We don't want it to go beyond the scope of this application, of this website. So 127.0.0.1 or localhost. You can go back to any site, any domain that you've been to, and you can right-click on that and remove from scope or add to scope. Okay, so that is the quickest and easiest way for us to modify what we're going to spider. Right, so in this case, we look at that, we know we're good to go, 127.0.0.1 and localhost. If we're not sure, very easy. We go into the settings and we just disconnect the internet. Just shut off your network adapter. You don't even have to worry about it then. All right, so from here, if you explore this localhost, you'll see as you navigate the site, you're building up information about the site. You're seeing pages, you're seeing subfolders, you're trying to understand in as much detail as you can information about the site. If we go back to here, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to delete. I'm going to try to delete everything here to clear out this clutter. Delete selected items. Yes, I want to do that. Okay, and we'll get rid of these as well. Delete selected items. Yes. Okay, we go back to the site. Let's just visit the home page. Go back to our burp, and here we go. So what did we get? Okay, we've got a handful of pages that it's found. These are grayed out, so it's found links to them, but we haven't visited those pages ourselves, and some additional information here. Okay, so we want to spider. Spidering, what spidering will do is now it becomes active. We're telling burp to visit every single link that it's found and then find any other links that it can. And the idea is to discover as many pages, files, and folders as we can about the site without having to visit the thing ourselves. Right? So we can do this passively. We can just simply go to a site. We can navigate through it however we can based off of the level of access that we have. And then we can also now take it to the next level and say, you know, this tool, Burp Suite, do it for me. Right? So we've identified our host. We can just double check that we're still within scope for that domain and only that domain. We can go back to the host. We can right-click and we can say spider this host. Okay. Some of the items are outside of the scope, and would you like to include those? No, I'm fine because we've included the scope that we want. Okay. Now if we go to the spider, okay, then what you have is your ability to control the spider. Right? So you can see right now, again, the user interface on this thing is not all that intuitive, but once you get used to it, you just know where to go. So you go to spider and you say run the spider. Right? And here we see activity, right? A bunch of requests have been made, a bunch of bytes have been transferred, and it's going to keep spidering that site. We go back to the target, and you can see that all those that were light gray are now black, or a darker black, or not a bold, but a darker black, because it's been to all of them. We have expanded what we've been able to see. Okay, so there's additional pages that have been discovered, there's additional folders. We have a lot more information about the site, and our spider did that for us. Okay. So that helps us out a lot. So that's the purpose behind it. So the whole idea behind the lab is to, one, get your proxy set up, get your browser configured to use it, understand the process that it's going through, and then start to use these tools to explore the website itself. Let's see. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Go back to our spider tab, and eventually the spider is going to stop. And so once you feel like it's made enough requests or you've stopped seeing activity here, you can just stop your spider. Go back to the target, and you'll notice one thing that it skipped was our logout. Right? So as you're spidering a site, you have to be careful, because if you trigger the logout functionality, then that can change what you're able to do. Let's do this. So I'm going to log out here, and I'll show you what happens when we log out. Okay, so we've logged out. I'm now going to delete everything here. Okay, and now let's just refresh this page. Go back to burp. There's our local host. Okay, all we have is the login page. If we say let's spider this host, okay, spider's running, everything's working. We got some results. So I guess I wasn't expecting that, and the reason why is that it must have been able to reuse that session ID. So because it's a vulnerable application, it didn't actually destroy it. Which is a good thing to talk about, because when you log out from a site, that session ID that we've been talking about, if that's not destroyed, in this case we logged out, but we were still able to access those pages. So let's just go to Let's see what would be a good page to go to. I suppose index.php would be all right. Let's see if we can get there. Okay, so even though I clicked log out, it in fact didn't log me out because it didn't destroy that session token. So my spider, as well as me, we were able to go right back into the application. So that's actually a vulnerability in the site, and you may or may not have explored that or identified that in some of the labs here that we talk about. So that's a problem. What should have happened, we should have logged out. That token should have been destroyed. That means that the server no longer recognizes it, and we shouldn't have been able to get anywhere within this application. So, all right. That's the application. You can also, you'll need to set up or run, there we go, application proxies, OWASP app, and you'll see that it's a very similar tool. It's going to complain because we've got a listener on port 8080, so you can have, if you have both of these up and running, you may need to go into your proxy, your options, and this is how you shut your proxy off, because you can't have two proxies running on the same listening at the same port at the same time. So you may have to change either what ports it listens on, or you'll have to have one disabled and one enabled. You know, probably the easiest thing to do is just have one tool open at a time. Here you're going to find it's going to be very similar. You can set up, because you saw it already complained about something listening on port 8080. So you don't have to do any sort of configuration there. Actually, I guess you do. So how do we do that? Well, we'll come into here, and I forgot offhand where the setting was, so you'll have to just give me a second here to find that. Proxy, host 8080. Okay. And why aren't we listening? Oh, there we go. So now we're good. So I'm not sure what that hiccup was. But anyways, it's setting up. You're seeing similar type results. You're going to get more information out of this, different information. You see these flags, and you're going to be able to look at what these different alerts are, and they're going to give you information about some of the vulnerabilities within the application. And we'll talk more about those later on down the road. But you have an active scan, right? So this is the active scan I was talking about. So go through this as part of the lab and understand what it's doing. How is it different? What does it look like it's different than to you? And then compare the results. Right? All right, so that's it. That's proxies in Chapter 3, and we'll pick up with Chapter 4 next week. All right, thanks. I'll talk to you then.